And we are back now on KID News Radio 106.3 and 92.1. Joining us is U.S. Senator Mike Crapo from the nation's capital. Senator, good morning. It's good to have you on.
Good morning, Neal. I always welcome these conversations.
Well, we certainly appreciate the time that you make for us. These are very, very strange times right now. With this coronavirus pandemic that is going on. I know Congress has been very active. We talked to Congressman Simpson yesterday, and Congress has been very, very active working on some kind of a fix. What kind of an update can you give us?
Well, as is probably well understood now, the bill that the House passed had a number of problems with it, not the least of which was that it didn't accurately reflect the arrangement that had been agreed to with President Trump. They got that fixed now, and that bill, I think we were waiting for it still to get to the Senate yesterday, but I think it's at the Senate now. And the question is whether the Senate will pass that bill as is, and I think reluctantly I will support it. I think that its mechanism is a little bit problematic, but the real question is the Senate is going to pass additional legislation. This first bill was really just a first installment in terms of what needed to be done, and the next tranche may be put into this bill that we just received from the House and then sent back to the House, or maybe we'll do them in two different bills. But the Senate is now considering a much more significant and I think a much more effective response that will actually correct some of the problems that I think were in the House bill. And just quickly, what this entails is making sure that instead of pushing people into unemployment, because, businesses across the country are just shut down. They have no customers. There's no passengers on the airline, effectively, no people in the restaurants and so forth. And if we let that entire multiple sectors of our economy just shut down and the employees get laid off, then we will very possibly see major parts of these segments of our economy not come back after the crisis is brought under control, and or at least take much longer to rebuild. And so we're trying to stabilize that, and by doing so, we actually make it so that some of these paid family leave problems that the House bill generated are resolved because we don't put people on paid leave; we keep them employed.
So this is a bill that you would vote for. Now, I know that the House recessed. Is that right? But the Senate's still in session?
Yes, that's correct. And I don't know what plans the House has in terms of coming back. I think they're sort of waiting for the Senate. But it's also contemplated that if what the Senate does is agreeable to the House, they could even just accept it with a floor action by a voice, not even a voice vote, but a unanimous consent request. So the House can still act, and they are technically still in session. They're just in recess. So, but the answer is yes. The Senate is all 100 senators, with the exception of those who are out on the campaign trails running for president, are present in the Senate and working very aggressively to get these packages put together.
We're talking with U.S. Senator Mike Crapo from Capitol Hill this morning. Senator, I asked this of Congressman Simpson yesterday. How quickly, once it gets passed, how quickly could the relief be dispersed in terms of checks to families and that sort of thing? Is this something that can get a pretty quick turnaround?
Yes, in fact, one of the problems with the House mechanism was that issue, and the way we've gotten that addressed now is for those who are basically on leave, paid family leave, they would they would actually get their paycheck from their employer, and then the employer would deduct the cost of that from the employer's payroll tax bill. And it's a smooth transition. And so it really doesn't even stop. The whole process doesn't even stop. Under the Senate bill, they would not even be put on leave. They would be maintained as employees. And then the cost of that would be reimbursed to the employers, either by a loan that would ultimately be forgiven if they kept their employees in place, or through some other kind of quick mechanism. And so, yes, the answer is yes. The one of the big parts of the entire strategy that we're trying to put together is to have very smooth, efficient, and prompt payment of these payments so that we keep employees and small businesses engaged and operational, even though they may not at this point have the customers or the client base to actually keep bringing in the revenue. And that revenue stream is what we've got to protect and cover, or we will see major damage to the economy that's unnecessary.
And I just wanted to ask you about that. I mean, already we're seeing our local businesses, restaurants, movie theaters are a good example. I mean, you're seeing all kinds of businesses that are having to close their doors, cut employees' pay, or cut employees' hours, or even cut employees altogether. This is already having significant economic damage on local communities. Do you think this is a temporary issue if we can flatten the curve and get a handle on the spread of coronavirus, that the economy will come roaring back, as the vice president alluded to yesterday?
Yes, it can be made to work that way. As you say, as we get the curve flattened and we get past the crisis, if we still have, I will use the word, the infrastructure in place, if you will, if we still have the businesses there rather than being shuttered and literally not just the doors locked, but losing the businesses. If we still have the employees in place, and if we have not so damaged the average American citizen that they don't have any income, they don't have any savings, they don't have any buffer, but instead we've maintained their wage structures, we've maintained their financial stability, then the economy can come back and come back quickly. If we drain it down so that everybody uses up their entire savings buffer, so that businesses have to literally shutter and leases are lost and facilities can't move forward, and even when we do get past the crisis, there isn't enough income or wealth in the economy among the people to sustain the economy, then we could have really serious troubles. And that's exactly the problem that we're seeking to address in this legislation that the Senate's working on. This legislation is that the Senate is now literally working on to try to get done in the next day or two is much more major legislation than what the House did. The House was a relatively targeted, specific approach to those who have been put on leave. The Senate bill is trying to deal with keeping businesses and employees in place and ready to operate as soon as we can get past the crisis, where people can be back in groups and back engaged in society.
Senator, is there any other legislation that is moving forward? I know on the Finance Committee you're always working on some things, or has this coronavirus response pretty much dominated the attention of all of Congress for the last week or two?
Well, the answer is that the coronavirus issues have been dominant, but yes, there have been other activities. For example, there's some national security issues that are quite critical to us that we are addressing. We are on the tax issue. Actually, another piece of the corona response is in the tax committee, the finance committee, where the president is proposing, and I'm supportive of this. I haven't supported these things in the past, but this is an entirely different crisis than, say, the 2008 crisis or 9/11. The president is proposing to have a refundable tax credit for people so that we, again, keep resources in the pockets of people across the country rather than having that all drained out and then having to rebuild that once we get to the point where the virus is not causing people to stay inactive in the economy. And so we're looking at major tax legislation there. That will create some more debt at the federal level, but the argument is, and I tend to accept this reluctantly, that it would be better to put that debt on to the federal government rather than to spread that debt burden across the entire economy, and so that we can have an economy that picks up more quickly and will actually reduce the overall debt structure of the government from what it would be if we ran into that kind of economic collapse.
Last question that I have for you. I know we're kind of running out of time here. You mentioned a refundable tax credit. So let's say it's $1,000 per adult in the United States. Does that mean on your 2020 tax returns that you do next year that would be factored in, that it's sort of like an early tax refund for next year's tax returns?
Well, it's actually going to be this year. Whether they've done it or not, the president either already just today did or will, or the Secretary of Treasury will extend the tax filing deadline for 2019 tax returns for 3 months or so.
Okay.
And then this tax credit can actually be taken on this year's tax returns.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it's an important point to note. Many people get a refund, and then this refundable tax credit would add to that refund. And so they are not stopping the tax filing. They want people who are getting a refund to file right away so they can get that money back out to them.
Okay.
But they're extending it for those who might owe taxes so that they can wait 3 months and then get that return now.
Okay. All right. Now I understand. Senator, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And it certainly is a crazy time right now, but we appreciate your thoughts and time that you spend with us.
Thank you. I look forward to our next visit.